In this episode of Gleaning Mustard Seeds, you'll hear the second chapter of the audible version of Fleecy Clouds, one woman's story of surviving and thriving after childhood abuse by Gail Barber and Alice Sullivan. Fleecy Clouds is available in paperback, hardcover, Kindle, and audio. Links to purchase the book will be included in the show notes. Listen now as Christi Barber Parsons reads Chapter 2, Little House.
Chapter 2, Little House. Look how good and pleasing it is when families live together as one. Psalm 133:1. Wayne was Mama's firstborn, a gorgeous, writhing bundle of expression, warmth, and love. Daddy's sentiment about his first son's birth never changed. He'd retell the story with glistening eyes, his smile marked by nostalgic pride. As Wayne laid on Mama's chest, learning her breath and heartbeat, Daddy admired his tiny form. Swaddled in a soft blue cloth, he was perfect in every way, except for a small, open spot on his spine. He was born with spina bifida, a congenital disability which affects the spine of a fetus. When the doctors first told my parents about the hole, the breath left their bodies. Mama's sensitivity made her panic, while Daddy's unbridled hope kept him optimistic. The year was 1940, and treatment options were limited. "It won't be serious," the doctors promised Daddy when they began conversations about surgery. Wayne was 18 months old and just beginning to walk well when he was admitted to a Methodist hospital near Memphis, Tennessee. Daddy always liked to tell people that Wayne once walked. As his surgeons explained the risk of the complex procedure, Mama cradled Wayne's head and held back tears. It would be an experimental surgery, the most innovative practice in the nation. Though general anesthesia would have been sufficient, it was decided that Wayne would be given an epidural with the largest needle my parents had ever seen. Sadly, the shock paralyzed him below the waist. Wayne was given only 2 years to live, but his ferocious spirit and bright will to survive kept him transcending the odds. Wayne's hope eclipsed the limitations the external world put on him. He was a source of light whose vitality would ensure him a whole 80 years of exuberant thriving. As a little girl, I believed my oldest brother to be possibly wiser than Daddy, who is almost impossible to surpass in my eyes. Despite the complications of Wayne's wheelchair and the pain of seeing my parents care for him while we lived in poverty, Wayne's story was one of determination and grace. We were lucky to have it woven in the fabric of our family. It was as if the best pieces of Daddy and Mama had mixed for a holier lesson than any of us could have imagined. Even the days of suffering were profound, with Wayne there to make sense of them. He was the greatest teacher of the family, and certainly hard to live up to. Wayne's personality never detracted from the sweetness of my younger brother, Don. Though I was far too little to absorb the day of Don's birth, I do remember thinking he was very pretty. Most of us had dark features from our Native American relatives, paired with toasted skin and black or dark brown hair. I looked more European than the rest, with light hair to go with my blue eyes. Daddy's eyes were such a pure shade of cornflower blue that they almost looked violet. Wayne's eyes were black, and my eyes had a sky blue hue. But when Don was born, his eyes matched Daddy's. I knew by the look of him, Don was certainly ours. But even more specifically, I felt like he was mine. I would stay with my baby every moment I could when we were little. Days were full for Mama then. At barely 3 years old, I was just old enough to do a few things on my own. I could dress and feed and most importantly occupy myself when Mama had to love on baby Don or provide special care for Wayne. Memories from that time are fragmented. When I close my eyes, I can still see my distorted reflection in the shiny metal of Wayne's wheelchair. The smell of his rubber tires is in my nose as he reaches out to cushion my tiny hands between his larger ones. Sometimes he holds baby Don in his lap. Baby Don always smells like powder. I'm not sure when that changed, when he started to smell like other things like shoes and grass and a hot day, but those happy smells will always be with me. Being the only girl among brothers made me feel safe in the world. I was sandwiched between them, the littlest lady of the family, until blue-eyed Brenda was born. We were primed for Brenda's birth, because the stray we'd taken in had had kittens first. I'd noticed that Big White Cat, our family pet, had gotten rather fat, but I didn't understand why her body was changing so much until my very pregnant mama said, "She's going to have babies." I was so excited, I clapped and squealed. I'd been told about kittens, but I'd never seen one in real life. When Big White Cat went into labor, Daddy fixed a warm bed for her, old rags and newspapers in a box inside the closet. Not understanding any of it, I got ready for bed. Mama said, "When you get up in the morning, the kittens will be here in the box." I woke up the next morning and ran to the closet. There they were, lots of tiny white kittens. Mama got one out and let me hold it. Wayne was already up. He had 2 kittens on his lap. Daddy smiled and explained, "They are brothers and sisters, just like you, Wayne, and Dawn." I thought Mama was going to have kittens, and that's when he explained to me that we were going to get another one of us. Daddy and Mama would have to go away for a few days to have the baby, and that he hoped our new baby would like us. Later we went to the hospital, and there she was. She was small and squishy, like Dawn had been when he was little and new. But we all agreed she wasn't as cute as Dawn. Dad said, "That's how you know she'll grow up to be a beautiful woman." Over time, Brenda did become more lovely. Daddy was never wrong. As I snuggled with Mama in her hospital bed, I watched my little sister squirming and cooing in her arms in the bed. Wayne watched with the same awe and amusement. He'd parked his wheelchair on one side of her bed and hadn't moved, smiling as he watched the innocence of a new life, proudly knowing he had one more sibling to teach and protect. I couldn't keep my eyes off Brenda. I wondered what it would be like when she was bigger and we could play pretend in a girl way instead of the way I'd always played with my brothers. That day, as Mama nursed baby Brenda, Daddy got a call at the hospital. I could tell something was terribly wrong because of his face. His eyes widened and looked strange. There was an emotion I couldn't read. He looked disoriented and pale. Mama asked what was wrong. He put his hand up, shook his head, and rushed out of the room. The assisting nurses entered simultaneously and distracted us from whatever trouble existed outside of the hospital room. Hours melted together as we fell more in love with the pink baby sleeping that was now ours, until Daddy came back for us, and time stopped. When Daddy stepped back into the room, he seemed to be a physically different person. It was as though he'd been in a war, marked by age, grime, and weariness. He looked awful. His clothes were dirty, and he had a strange smell about him. His face was oily and smeared with black marks. Solemnly, he asked Wayne and me to leave the room. The nurses gently took our hands and led us into the hallway where we watched our parents through small glass panels in the door. Daddy stepped close to Mama, gently holding onto her shoulders as he spoke. Mama's upper body went limp with agony, and she started to weep over sleeping Brenda. That was my first memory of overwhelming fear and seeing my parents' powerlessness. Mama had just given birth and was now in mental and emotional labor unlike any distress I'd ever seen. The earlier call had come from a frantic neighbor alerting Daddy that our house had burned to the ground. The same good-hearted neighbor had gone over to our house while we were at the hospital to iron my family's clothes so Mama would have one less thing to worry about. But sadly, she'd left the iron on top of the ironing board, and it had somehow fallen over and set the house on fire. Outside in the hallway, Wayne and I could only watch, wondering what had happened to turn such a happy day into such a sad one. Daddy comforted Mama as best as he could until the dark. Navy sky was so thick outside the hospital windows, we had to leave. It was way past our bedtime. Mama and Brenda stayed in the hospital while we went to stay with relatives. A few days later, Daddy picked us up, and we all went to collect Mama and Brenda from the hospital. As we walked through the long corridors of the hospital, we said little. Daddy's energy was so low it felt like we were trudging through the longest night to get outside. Feebly, he opened the car door for us and we climbed in. Through tears, he tried to tell us what we were returning to. He tried to warn us what our little eyes would see, that it would be scary, but he wasn't composed enough for us to understand. His words were like iron, burned, and ash. When we pulled up into the driveway, there was a pile of black wood and charred furniture, the skeleton of a house we once knew. I could make out the shape of some things, my parents' bed frame, the legs of the kitchen table, and our wheelbarrow. Daddy said anything that could have been salvageable had been stolen. Instead of doing what they could do to help, other neighbors had come over to steal what was left of our family's meat and anything else they could carry out of the rubble that hadn't been charred or melted. Mama and Daddy had grown, picked, prepared, and canned many jars of food that were stored in a little building behind the house. Those were gone too. In a poorer-than-poor community, you're only friendly neighbors until there's an opportunity to acquire free goods, even if it's due to another family's loss. We had nothing left, except for Big White Cat, who had miraculously survived. Everything else was gone. Without the four walls of our little house, we managed to find lodging for the next few days with Daddy's relatives who lived nearby. Later that week, the government stepped in and moved us to Stinson Hollow, where they gave us a little white house on the water. It was so much bigger and even had a bathroom with a bathtub. We were able to bring Big White Cat with us. It was new and exciting, but sad at the same time, because of all the things that had been burned in the fire or stolen. I began to reflect on the memories I'd had in that little house and how confusing it felt to have nothing familiar to return to when I was at my most exhausted. The safe feeling I'd had coming home after playing outside all day was what I imagined Daddy felt after returning from work. One memory saturated in my mind specifically. Earlier that spring, I'd been out all day with Wayne playing with tobacco sacks. We didn't have many toys, so we used whatever we could find outdoors to ignite our imaginations. Mama was watching us, but only intermittently. She was patient while we collected little rocks in the road, accumulating the most beautifully marked of the bunch to save for later. Then we got rowdy with the rocks. Mama hated it when we get rowdy. I'd roll mine to Wayne, then he'd roll them back to me. I took the same form as when Daddy and I would skip rocks in the lake and watched mine skid as Don hopped, screamed, and eventually wailed as he got hit. The longer we played, the more aggressive and loud our fun became, until Mama had reached her limit. "Enough!" she called to us. But we would not listen. We were in the heat of competition, past the point of composure, until finally I felt what I'd never experienced from Mama before. A unique punishment in the form of a whack. Dizzily, I looked up at her. Over my head, she was wielding a fly swatter with an angry look on her face. The swat was one thing, but the look of disappointment and fury on her face hurt my heart. Mama had always been gentle with us, even when she was upset. I'd never experienced this side of her. Big tears welled up in my eyes. I cried, and I couldn't stop crying. Then Mama started crying too. By the time we made it back in the house, guilt had set in. She felt so bad about it, she wrapped me up in her arms, holding and rocking me until finally she carried me to my room and put me to bed. But I couldn't sleep through the sniffling. A few hours later, I felt Daddy's warm presence enter the house, and I heard mumbling downstairs. She explained what had happened, and soon I heard heavy footsteps. Daddy's silhouette entered my dark room. He sat on the bed next to me. He wrapped me up in his arms and comforted me. I told him I was afraid of the next morning because I didn't know if Mama was going to be mad at me. "Will she hit me again?" I asked him. I felt the heaviness and grief in his body when he responded, "No, baby. Mama just had a bad day, okay?" I nodded as he said this, letting the fear dissipate. If Daddy said it, I knew it was true. I stayed awake a long time after he left my bedside. After everyone had gone to sleep, I slipped out of my bed to do my nightly ritual. Despite feeling rattled by the day, my tiny bare feet tiptoed across the cold floor as I opened my creaking bedroom door. I neared the staircase and flipped on the warm light to herald 2 individual portraits in golden round frames that hung next to the bathroom. "Good night, Daddy," I said, looking at the picture of my hero. "Good night, Mama." "I'm sorry," I whispered under my breath before returning to bed. Within 6 months, I would be without a bed, without those 2 perfect portraits that kept us safe while we were sleeping.
Thank you for listening to Gleaning Mustard Seeds with Jerrie Barber. If you found a mustard seed, send a text or email with the link to a friend. This podcast was brought to you by Gail Barber's book, Fleecy Clouds, One Woman's Story of Surviving and Thriving After Childhood Abuse, by Gail Champion Barber and Alice Sullivan. Gail writes in the introduction to her book, I hope you find a blessing in this book that will add to your life and you can share with others. A difficult beginning didn't ruin the remainder of my life, and it doesn't need to ruin yours either. You can order your book from Amazon. There is a link in the show notes. Thank you for listening. Jerrie looks forward to next week as we continue to collect and plant mustard seeds.